Hi there, and welcome to the Charleston Leadership Interviews. I'm Meg White, Senior Consultant at Delta Think and a Director of the Charleston Conference. In this series, we sit down with leaders and innovators who are making a real difference in scholarly publishing, libraries and librarianship, and the broader information world. Each conversation is a chance to hear firsthand how these decision makers tackle new challenges, rethink traditional models, and collaborate across sectors, as well as we get to know these folks a little bit more behind their professional title, and certainly in Judy's case, their accomplishments. So I am delighted to be able to welcome Judy Russell today to the Charleston Leadership Interview Series. Judy, we are so glad that you are here with us today, and thanks for joining.
Well, thank you for including me in this.
So I must admit, I'm a little starstruck. So I hope that we can get through the conversation. You have such a long and accomplished career and have contributed so much. So can't wait to get started. On that note, I should say I neglected to give your title. Judy is the former dean. She has just stepped down as the dean of the university libraries at the University of Florida, but that is just her most recent role. She's taking a research year on her way to a well-deserved retirement, but you have an incredible history of contributions in librarianship and scholarship. So I'd like to start, if you could start with talking a little bit about your professional history, your career path, and some of the amazing accomplishments that are part of your background.
Well, I'll start it with a very beginning thing because it's sort of funny, and that is that I transferred to a new school in 8th grade, and my mother had a mantra: never volunteer for anything. She was an Army wife, and you were always getting volunteered, so she avoided literally volunteering, getting voluntold instead. And I was assigned to a seat in the back row in homeroom, and they went to pass out forms to sign up for clubs and service activities. And I sat with my hands folded happily in my lap, but they passed one too many forms down my aisle. And I'm a compulsive reader, so if you put something in front of me that's written, I'm going to read it. And lo and behold, one of the options was the library. And I checked that box. And I started working in my 8th grade library as a volunteer all through high school, all through college. By college, I was doing summer jobs in special libraries in the Washington, D.C. area. I went to college knowing I was going to go on and get a master's in library science, and did. My first job was with the Communications Satellite Corporation, just a really interesting time in the development. I was working at the ComSat Labs. At the time, they did the first transatlantic satellite communication, not using the cable under the sea. So, but I mean, ancient history, but just a really exciting time to spend the first 5 or so years of my career with them. And moved through a number of other jobs. I won't try to list them all, but at some point moved into the information industry and spent well over a decade working in the publishing side, mainly in product development, but eventually into some government industry liaison work. And while I was working at LexisNexis, which was then Mead Data Central, I was invited to be the first non-depository librarian on the Depository Library Council. And I sort of brought automation to the DLC. And I would travel with my little printer and my little, I wouldn't say portable, but luggable laptop, and worked with them. And because of that, I became acquainted with the public printer at the time, and he recruited me to come to the government printing office. And so I came there and was asked to set up the Office of Electronic Information Dissemination, but also to work in leadership over the Depository Library Program. So I was fortunate enough to be at GPO and to work on the legislation that created what was then called GPO Access, and has gone through several iterations since then, but is the major database that GPO still uses to provide public access to a wide range of government information. I ended up staying at GPO for a while, and then I left and went briefly back to the private sector, and then was recruited to the Institute, to the National Commission on Libraries and Information Science, which became merged back into IMLS later. So I was the deputy director there for a number of years, and then a new public printer came in, and he recruited me to come back as the first woman superintendent of documents. And so I spent another number of years there. And when Bruce James stepped down as public printer, I also prepared to leave GPO since I was his appointee. And I was recruited to come to UF as the first dean of university libraries. And it was many years later that I found out how they ended up recruiting me, because I couldn't figure that out at all. I had not applied for the job, but they were a regional depository library and a large R1, and just a really interesting opportunity. And I came down for an interview and just fell in love with the place. I mean, the people I met were just so amazing, and it just seemed like such an exciting opportunity. So I came here in 2007 and spent 18 years as the Dean of University Libraries. And so I have been very fortunate in my career, a lot of really interesting places to be and interesting times to be there. The first time I was at GPO was when the PDF files were introduced, and they came to us because we had a lot of non-copyrighted content. And we did some very early work with Adobe on that, and sharing it out with the government agencies and working with them on using that as a publishing technique. And, so just being in the right place at the right time for some of these kinds of interesting things. But
Well, it's amazing because so many of the things you just spoke about, we sometimes take for granted these days. They are so foundational, and they were so important in iterating on how to take information from the pages of printed books to digital. We sometimes forget we didn't start at A and end up at Z. There were lots of steps in the interim, and lots of people like you who had the vision to keep it moving forward. So,
one of my favorite stories, it's sort of horror stories really, is that the GPO access legislation passed, and we started setting it up right at the time, the really early days of the web, and the Clinton administration was in, and Clinton had decided to have whitehouse.gov and then eventually to have every federal agency have a website. It's sort of hard to imagine there was life before that.
right. We take it for granted.
And I was invited to come to what was then called the old Executive Office Building, now the Eisenhower Building, adjacent to the White House, to their auditorium. And they were going to have a presentation to people representing all the federal agencies on whitehouse.gov and GPO access. And so the ultimate irony was that they couldn't get whitehouse.gov to operate at all. I mean, couldn't get it up. They were able to get GPO access up, but the technology for broadcasting it up on the big screen was not functioning properly, and they put in a substitute. So I was sitting on the edge of the stage, dangling my feet off the stage, with a laptop beside me running the demonstration up behind me on the big screen. And I mean, it was pretty horrible, at the time, but I figured I could never be afraid again of speaking anywhere about anything and since theirs hadn't come up at all, anything I did, the fact that it demonstrated a live demo at all, was considered highly successful. But I mean, those things you can look back on and laugh. At the time, it didn't feel very funny.
Oh. That's the number one rule, though. You never, if you're going to give a talk, you never give the live demo. It's the number one rule.
So. Yeah, but in this case, that's what they wanted for both.
You got it.
So yes, so. But yes, you're right. I mean, I've been just extremely fortunate to be in a lot of interesting places at interesting times. I've had cause in recent years with some of the changes that have gone on very recently, but even before that, to look back at a lot of the work we did during the 5 years or so that I was at the National Commission. And it's amazing how those hearings that we held and the reports that we produced have held up over time. I mean, they're still... that, obviously certain things age out, but the fundamental policy recommendations that we were making and things have just stood the test of time, so it's been, as I say, I just feel very fortunate to have landed in in these various jobs. Often, I wrote an article at one point that used the term serendipity. I think a lot of my career has been serendipitous, that, I've just, interesting things and opportunities have come along and have turned out to be good. When I came here in '07, I had absolutely no idea that I would be here for 18 years. I had a 5-year contract, and I assumed at the end of 5 years, I'd be going off and doing something else. But, it's been an absolutely amazing place to work. And again, just a very interesting time in libraries and information to see the things that have come and gone with DEI, some of the technology changes now, the AI stuff, which this campus is deeply embedded in AI. I think we still have the largest academic AI computing system in the country. And we've embedded it in the curriculum, so we're supporting AI in virtually every discipline that we teach. So what a fascinating time to be here, and it's been just wonderful.
It is, and the pace of change, I think, is astounding.
Yes.
So, but speaking of change, and I talked about this in the open, though, you recently announced your plan to retire from the University of Florida. You've stepped down as dean. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and the timing that went into that decision?
Well, I mean, it was sort of the culmination of a number of things. One of which is last December, I had my 80th birthday. And while that in itself didn't really change anything, it certainly was a number that makes you sort of stop and think about what is happening with the rest of my life. My family felt like they had sort of been in line behind the University of Florida for 18 years because I was here and, not always there with them, and they had been advocating that at some point when I was ready to retire, I would come back to the DC area, which I've just done this summer. And the individuals who were president and provost I had served with for a very long time, and my confidence in their ability to choose a successor was very high. But I knew that there would be a change in the presidency and didn't know what would come next. As it turned out, things became different than what I expected anyway, because you can't ever really predict them. But it just seemed like in many ways it was a time to step back and let someone else step into this role and to have more family time. And there's been a tradition here that as deans step down, we're often given a research year, and I'm a PI on a Mellon grant, and I've got other research projects that I'm continuing to work on for the university, but I'm able to do it from the DC area. And 2 of my 3 children and all 3 grandchildren are there. So, it's been really nice to go home to the DC area because I spent so much of my life and career there.
And I know how proud of a Gator you are. I don't know if our audience can see it, certainly if they're listening, but Judy's got her Gator pin on. There it is. Put it front and center.
Yes, which I almost have never seen in public without one. So, and in fact, my license tag here in Florida was a vanity tag UFLIB. And you can do a Google search with just those 5 letters and you'll get to our website. You don't need anything else. UFLIB will get you there.
So, that's a librarian for you. Not only were you creative enough to come up with the license plate, but you made sure people could find the license plate. I love that.
So when I was moving to Virginia, my daughter did the research and said, "Oh, Mom, Virginia is one of the states that has University of Florida license plates because there's enough Gators, I guess, in the area." So I now have a Virginia license plate that says University of Florida, has a picture of a Gator on it, and is UFLIB. So if you don't look at it closely, you think I haven't gotten a new license plate at all. So it stays with us.
Fantastic. It's so good. So you are a longtime attendee at the Charleston Conference, and you spoke there on a panel this year, participating with a group that discussed how to lead in times of crisis. Do you believe that libraries and scholarship are in crisis, and why or why not?
So you said recently you thought the pace of change had accelerated, and I think we've been in decades of change as just the technology and other things have evolved. But lately it's become overlaid with other things, political and otherwise. And it is a very challenging time. And I think part of what's challenging is how difficult it is to plan and to anticipate what's going to happen. And, we'd all prefer to be proactive than to be reactive. And yet I think in recent years, so much of what we've been having to deal with in budgets and other kinds of things has been reactive. And certainly I casually mentioned DEI coming in, but a number of years ago, we were all expected to be doing work in DEI and to be taking that into account in a lot of our programs and our hiring. And now, certainly in the Southeast, but also in other parts of the country, that is not only no longer expected, it's expected that we will not do that. So, those kinds of things cause kind of a constant adaptation, right? And an effort to respond when we'd all really rather be being proactive and taking the initiative on the things that we want to be taking initiative on. I find with my team here that I've spent a lot of time, through COVID, obviously that was a huge change, and it's had continuing effects on remote work and on other kinds of things. But a lot of time spent just sort of reassuring the people that work for me and then our colleagues at the university and our students that fundamentally we haven't changed. Fundamentally, our values remain the same. Fundamentally, we want the library to be a safe and welcoming place. We want to be really focused on user needs, whether that's high-end research or an entering freshman who needs support. So there's a certain amount of that overlays, I think, any of our jobs in leadership of how do you try to maintain as I say, I would say the values, but the sense of purpose, the mission, and not let a lot of these things throw us off stride or get us to set aside things that are so important to us. So yes, I do think it is a time of crisis. It's a time, and maybe crisis is not the right word, uncertainty, right? And as I say, it's very hard to plan. It's very hard to really know what's going to come around the corner. And it makes a lot of us be kind of on guard. It makes us, I think, sometimes afraid to take stands on things because we don't want to call attention to our institution or to ourselves. And so I'm a fairly outspoken person. So sometimes hard for me to not tilt at that windmill, but to, try to step back a little bit. But I do think that there's still an enormous love and respect for libraries. There's still a lot of dependence. And yet, we're certainly not what we were when I was in school or even in some of the early jobs that I had. As I say, just the fact that I was around and saw the internet coming into the federal government, and now it's impossible to imagine what that was like. To have tried to do as much as we did to communicate government information without that kind of a platform and that kind of a resource. So I thought it was an interesting topic for Charleston, and I really enjoyed the people I was on the panel with and hearing from them about the different things that they've been dealing with and their ways of dealing with it. We have some really wonderful people in this profession, and it's always wonderful, particularly at Charleston. There's a certain intimacy at Charleston, I think, that lets you kind of touch base and kind of reinforces things that we're doing and that we're not alone. That my experience is going to be slightly different than someone else's, but we're all having a somewhat similar environment in which we're trying to function.
I agree with you at the conference this year. And Judy, the session I mentioned, I should say for the audience, was part of the plenary discussion moderated by Jim O'Donnell, which was just fantastic. So if you can catch that on the Charleston Hub, please do, if you weren't able to be there in person. But there definitely was, post-COVID, I think, even such a sense of shared purpose at the conference this year. It really stood out for me. And talking with Roger Schoenfeld, actually, from Ithaca, he mentioned, we were talking about this, what did you take away? And he said, it's just a bunch of people really committed to the work. And I said to him, I'm going to reuse that, Roger. I promise I'll quote you, but I think that was my vibe there. Yeah. Did you have any other key
And
takeaways or some things that made 2025 unique for you?
for the last 3 years, I've been involved in panels dealing with accessibility for individuals with disabilities. And I mentioned NCLIS and the fact that some of this goes back. While I was at NCLIS, we had a hearing on information services for individuals with disabilities. And I was the editor of the hearing document that came out as a result of that. So it's something I've been interested in and involved in for a long time. But it's been really interesting to see over the last 3 years, and we're actually talking about, should we put in for a fourth one next year, because by then the new regulations will be in place. And so it'll, we've been sort of looking ahead. Last year, we were looking a little bit at what was happening in Europe and how that foreshadowed for us, and perhaps got some of our vendors already delivering content to us in ways that was more useful to us. It'll be very interesting then to see what really did happen in the United States and how much change came. But again, just the number of panels on AI, of course, was astounding. But there was also a lot of different sessions that dealt with accessibility, and to see the interest and enthusiasm on that topic and the dedication to it each year become stronger has been really wonderful. And because it's something that I'm very committed to. And in fact, it's one of the things I'm continuing to work on in my research
I was
time.
going to say, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're working on in your research here?
Well, it's kind of fragments of things, but I've been involved really from the day I arrived, because that was the early years of the Digital Library of the Caribbean. And we have a major Mellon grant for that, for which I'm a co-PI. And so I've been continuing to be very active with that whole initiative. Separately, we had a major project with Cuba that we had been working on for a number of years, jointly with the National Library of Cuba, and changes in legislation here made it not possible for us to continue that in the way that we had been doing. But we've still been collaborating with a number of universities and other organizations to build as comprehensive a digital collection of information from and about Cuba as we can. And that has continued. It's just not in a direct partnership. I mean, I had been going to Cuba 4 or 5 times a year, and now it's been almost 4 years since I've been. So, but there is work that can still continue, and does. And particularly in Florida, I mean, the physical closeness of Cuba to
Right.
Florida and the impact that Cuba had in the whole settlement of Florida, and really they're sort of being a gateway to Central and Latin America as well. It's for a tiny little island, it's an enormous historic impact. And we have a major collection here on Latin American and Caribbean studies. So I've been continuing to be involved in that. We also have a Panama Canal Museum collection, which is something that was started by when the canal was turned over to Panama. A lot of the Americans who lived and worked there lost their homes and their jobs. I mean, they knew it was coming. It was a 20-year implementation of the treaty. But some of them who returned to the United States ended up in Florida, and they started a small museum. And at some point they felt they couldn't continue it, but they transferred the collection to us, and we've continued to build it and integrate it with our other Latin American and Caribbean collections. And that's just been a really interesting and fabulous activity that I continue to be involved in. I just was back in Panama last month, I guess. Well, not last month, because now it's December and October. And So that's another thing. I'm continuing to participate in several groups that are working on issues related to accessibility, because that continues to interest me. And I think I've often felt we have a small library press here. And as I was working initially on the implementation of our press and our commitment to accessibility, I find myself, and it's not just in accessibility, it flows into other things, but I don't feel I can be asking vendors to do something that I'm not prepared to do myself. Mm-hmm. And so the understanding of how difficult it was, as small as we are, to make sure that our things were fully accessible was an important lesson, right? And it made it me maybe more an effective advocate for it when I talk to people in the industry, because I recognize the challenge that they're facing and that we're facing when we take on that publishing role, but also how incredibly important it is. So those are just a few of the things that I'm working on. It's enough to keep me out of mischief, I guess.
Earlier, you said you were fortunate in your career. You had a lot of serendipity. I think it was a lot of nose to the grindstone, Judy. I think you put a lot of shoe leather into all of these projects. And to see you at this point in your career, the stage in your career, still continuing to take on new challenges, it's humbling. It's very humbling. So
well, it's kind of you to say that. I don't know how not to do it, I guess is the truth of it, right? When I spoke to the provost the first time about the schedule we ultimately implemented, his first question to me was, "Are you really sure you're ready to retire?" and my answer was, "No, because I don't know what I'll do when I get up in the morning," right? And so actually, this has really been a wonderful year for that reason, that it's a transition, but I'm also still wondering what happens after I retire in July. So some of these things that I'm working on, I'm hoping are things that will go with me into my retirement, and that I won't lose, the ability to participate, but also hopefully to make some meaningful contributions.
Well, I certainly think all of that will continue to be true. And I'm very pleased. You did mention you were going to come back to Charleston in 2026. So that is certainly good news for the Charleston Hub community. And we'll look forward to hearing more about your continuing work on accessibility. Judy, thank you so much for taking the time today. We certainly appreciate it. And thank you, I should say, for your support of Charleston as well. The conference.
I remember when it was a very tiny, intimate conference, and there was some great, wonderful things about that, because you could meet virtually everybody who was there. And, and now it's become a much bigger, more complex, but it's still just, there's an energy there and an excitement and an ability to interact with a lot of people that just makes it a really valuable place to be. So.
Yep. And you've shaped so many things in your career, and the conference we'll just add that to your list. So anyway.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Meg White, talking with Judy Russell, Dean of the University Libraries at the University of Florida. And Judy, we thank you so much for your time, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you so much.